Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Today we're going to be hearing a talk from Rob Mock. His talk will be about 25 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions and discussion afterwards. Please keep yourself muted during the talk. Actually, yeah, you can if you could keep yourself muted during the talk for most of the time and post questions in the chat. But Rob said if you have a burning question or something that needs clarifying or something that's not clear, then feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. I have to tell you, we're recording the session. That's because we're going to put the sessions on YouTube afterwards. Quite a lot of the talks are on YouTube, but I'm a little bit behind with uploading a few of them. So yeah, anyway, so Rob did his PhD in experimental psychology at Oxford. And then since then, he's done some work at both UCL and the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences unit in Cambridge, where he's currently an early career fellow. And yeah, with that, I will pass over to Rob. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. So yeah, as Marcus said, I'll go through the talk, but if there's anything that's really unclear, it's like, that would help with a quick clarification, that would be great. If you just shout and let me know, because there are bits that wouldn't make sense if, we just keep going. But yes, and then we'll keep big questions to the end if that's all right. So hi everyone. So I'll talk about this multi-level account of hippocampal function in concept learning from behavior to neurons. So right now I'm in Cambridge working with John Duncan, but collaborate heavily with Brad Love at UCL. This work was, half of it was done at UCL and still in collaboration with Brad. So this is the general talk overview. I'll first introduce why I think multi-level explanations are kind of important in science and why we need more of them. We'll go on to a project talking about general learning mechanisms in hippocampal formation, and then go on to talking about multi-level account of this kind of model. So cognitive neuroscience is a multi-level discipline. We're interested in the mind and brain at multiple levels, from behavior to large-scale brain network activity, to high-dimensional brain activity patterns, down to the level of single neurons activities they're firing, as well as like neural assemblies, like these concept cells in the hippocampus or place in grid cells as well shown here. So we typically study the system at a specific level, at one of these levels, and sometimes we try to link across them, right? Like we correlate these behavioral processes or these behavior accuracy with brain activity patterns. And sometimes we also build models, so we can correlate these model internal activities or their behavioral performances with outputs rather with behavior, correlate their internal representation with the brain with interesting techniques. And this kind of sometimes tells us about what's going on, or at least gives us a hint as to what kind of mechanism might be at play. So one thing that I'll argue in this talk is that simply examining the system at these levels doesn't make a multi-level theory. So normally we try to match across these levels through correlation. So we try to match something like behavior with neural patterns, or maybe with a model representation, and that kind of suggests that maybe this model is a good description or a good idea of the mechanism that's going on underneath. For example, cognitive models might be able to capture behavior and correlate with the brain, but typically they have these abstract mechanisms or abstract components, such as like some kind of like reward or value that doesn't isn't specifically implemented in a particular way. Then we have stuff like neural network models, and especially the ones these days, they're very big, they're very powerful, they have high accuracy that might reach human level accuracy, and they even show correlation with the brain. But often they also don't map onto some high-level behaviors. They kind of like map onto some fast learning curves, or sometimes it's hard to understand what the mechanism, what kind of correlation actually means. So one major theme that I'm going to argue in this talk is that we need theories and models that capture the system across different levels. And this is, I will just explain a bit more what this means by the mechanistic levels or mechanistic philosophy. So just to give an overview, I'll first give a brief background on some of this concept learning and hippocampal function work, and talk about learning mechanism, the hippocampal formation with a cognitive model. And then I'll talk about a multi-level version of this model by decomposing these components into a lower level mechanism. So first, I'm going to tell you about some basic theories of concept learning and categorization. And this is just to give you an idea of what the models I'll be using look like. So classic ones like the prototype model, the idea is very simple, that we use the central tendency of the category to characterize a concept. So in this example, just to put like, let's say two dimensions, and there's these exemplars as particular dots in this kind of stimulus feature representational space, and the category prototype would be in the center. And so you would be able to kind of categorize, that this is a bird, or depending on how close it is to a category prototype, a bird or a mammal in this case. In exemplar theory, you have something that's on the other side of the extreme. Rather than just one single point, you would care about every single memory that you've seen before. So I've seen these are all the birds I've seen, and you compute some similarity with what's in memory compared to what you're seeing right now, and say, oh, the most similar thing to what I've seen before is part of that category. And so clustering model is what I'll focus on a bit more, and I always like to think of it as something in between these two extremes, where you can have a cluster or that represents a particular kind of distribution, and in this case, you see with this simple category structure, you would have like two clusters here, which is equivalent to a prototype model. But with these more complicated category structures, you might have a cluster for each particular distribution that kind of like figures that kind of recruits a cluster when it's needed, kind of learns based on error. And so the models that I'll talk about are a bit more like this. So they're algorithmic models. They can learn trial by trial, kind of learn where these cluster positions should be, and kind of output a particular category at the end. Well, at the end of the model, so the output of the model. So briefly, there's some work from FMRI. So okay, first, this is Brad Love's clustering model. Is sustained from a while back already. The idea here is just that there's a behavioral performance learning curves here. There's error curves. So type 1 of this category learning problem is learned quickest, and then type 6 is learned the slowest. And you can kind of see that the model output captures this behavioral pattern quite well. We've also done some FMRI work, and this is like the internal representation or latent variables in the model, and those correlate with the hippocampus during learning. We've also shown this using representational similarity analysis in just a separate task. So we also know that the hippocampal formation is implicated across many cognitive functions, right? So we must know about patient HM who had his bilateral medial temporal lobe, including bilateral hippocampus, and he wasn't able to form new memories. So it's also involved in learning associations and inferring new associations in concept learning. And there is cells in the hippocampus, in the human hippocampus, that seem to fire to particular concepts. So in this case, you can see this was one neuron, a single neuron that fires only to the actress Jennifer Aniston, and apparently not to anything else. So on the other side of the field, in rodents, we found place cells that seemed in the hippocampus that seemed to fire to particular locations. In a particular environment. So these are rodent recording, and these are firing rates, and grid cells which fire in the medial entorhinal cortex that fire in this kind of grid-like pattern. So one idea that has been quite popular in the last few years is talking about shared mechanisms across like spatial cell coding and more high level like conceptual spaces. And so the very simple kind of parallel people have thought about is like place cells talk about where you are, whereas concept cells might be about what you're perceiving or thinking about, and it's in a higher dimensional space, right? Different kind of features that care about the cells caring about. So we thought at the time that actually clustering models are quite a nice candidate for being able to do both of these things. Specifically, it can kind of do category learning, learns concept structures, but maybe on a navigation task also it can create spatial representations. So I'll just show you how this might work. So yeah, and the idea is that, of course, because it's using the same kind of learning process, it might actually be the same algorithm that's going on, rather than it's trying to do two different separate things. It's just a different context and it's the same learning rule. And so here's just a toy illustration of how this would work. The clustering model works. You have two dimensions here, but it would be a higher dimensional space in reality. On the first trial, the model sees the eagle, the closest cluster moves towards the eagle. So there's just the basic clustering rule, a cohorn update rule. The next trial, the model sees the cat, and then the closest cluster moves towards it. So over time, the idea is that these clusters move towards the center of these category distributions, and it's able to do categorization. How about on space? So if we just have this kind of like circular environment and we have a bunch of clusters in there, now we have an agent or a rodent that kind of moves around the environment, and you have the same rule. So the closest cluster will move slightly towards the agent. Over time, this is what happens. So the clusters kind of spread out over time and often creates this kind of really nice grid-like hexagonal pattern. And the idea here is that it's because of the two-dimensional space is uniformly kind of navigatable, or you can go around the whole surface, that this can happen. So in a real concept space or a semantic space, it would be much sparser, and it would be much more clumpy in the sense that all the kind of birds are more similar to each other, but you rarely will have like a bird that's, I don't know, as heavy as or as large as an elephant. And so there's just not, the space is not as uniformly traversable. So in the paper, we talk a bit more about interpretations about, so we kind of like link these to place cells or concept cells inhabiting a particular part of our representational space, and grid cells monitor these place cells and therefore have this kind of like multiple fields. And so, which kind of like links to the anatomy a bit as well, where which I can talk a bit more about if we're interested, but we have this idea in the paper. So that's quite nice. But one open question we had in this paper was how what these clusters were. So I kind of talked about how cognitive models are abstract. They have these components, like in this case clusters, and we kind of just like waved our hands a bit and said, oh, this cluster is probably corresponds to a bunch of place cells, or like a place cell assembly in the hippocampus, where you can have a group of neurons that care about a particular location. But that's kind of not enough. So we kind of thought, actually, we need to kind of explain this a bit more with a model with maybe a few more neurons than just a few clusters. So this is how we approached the problem. So we kind of thought a bit and read a bit about multi-level accounts. And there's actually quite a big set of literature from mechanistic philosophy in biology as well as neuroscience. That's very interesting. So first, why do we need a multi-level approach? So I kind of was quite vague about, I said some quite general things, we need think about multi-levels, which is kind of trivial, but maybe there's actually a bit more to this. So first, theory-based cognitive models capture behavior and provide like really good explanatory accounts for the behavior sometimes, but they're abstract. So how do we link to these two brain mechanisms? We can show these correlations, like I showed with the correlation with the activations of the model with like the hippocampus during learning, but how do we go beyond these correlates? So multi-level explanations allow us to link across levels, and the idea is that we can go from the model's abstract constructs down to the neurons whilst retaining the cognitive behavior as well. And so mechanistic levels are really a more general concept rather than related to neuroscience specifically. So Carl Craver is a philosopher of neuroscience and a scientist, and so he talks about this these different levels. And so you have some kind of high level thing that you're interested in that you need to explain. And how do you explain that? You want to explain it by decomposing it into the components that kind of mechanistically work with each other to create this behavior as well. So maybe the example would help. So if you have the circulatory system, you might have different components like heart and kidney that work together in order to make the oxygen and energy go around. But then you can decompose these components further. For example, the kidneys down into the kidneys filtering units, and you can do this as much as you want or as much as you need for a satisfying explanation of your system at hand. So they give this neuroscience example, a rather simple one, but it works quite well. So you have the behavior, which is like the rat navigating in a maze, and the hippocampus might have like a spatial memory or map of the environment. But then you might want to decompose the parts, like how does this map create it? So maybe like long-term potentiation plays a role in creating these memories or these location maps. So just a few more relevant, important things is that the levels idea is not like fixed. It's not like one of these levels are mapped onto each other across problems. There can be more levels in between or further down depending on your question, and the relevance is important as well. So some things may not be relevant to your explanation. So back to our problem. So one question is how we can do this. So actually, I'll put this way first. So one way of dealing with this problem for us is we might have a cognitive model that is able to explain the behavior that we have at the top level, but then we want to decompose this model down into a lower level mechanism that can kind of do the same thing. I can still do the behavior, but also explains a bit more as to how this cognitive model might be able to work at a lower or finer granularity. And so, as I mentioned, there's this cognitive model called sustain, and we decompose this model, so therefore call it sustained, and it's multi-unit neural population like clustering model. And so we start now, instead of a few clusters, we start with millions of units. And instead of winner take all, like in this model, it's K winner takes all. And we can learn over time based on similar principles to sustain. And so just to give you an idea, with these models, you have an input. It can be something very simple like binary values or continuous values with a few features. And you weight the attention. You have an attention weighting mechanism, and because some features might be more important than others for a particular category learning problem. And so now you have these units. So in the past, it could be one cluster in this particular part of space, but you can have, like, now here's 3, but you can have hundreds of them representing particular part of feature space. And so then they output to categorize the current stimulus at hand. So this is basically a set of weights that so a set of weights, that connection weights that learn by error. So you can have like I suppose it's basically like a single no hidden layer neural network trying to read out the signals that's the units here are activated. And so the model learns the cluster or the unit positions, learns the attention weighting, and then outputs the category signal. So it learns trial by trial and creates these learning curves and internal representation as well. So one question is, now that we have so many units, we have a coordination problem. So like how is a general problem, because how do you produce a group of neurons or a neural assembly that kind of has similar tuning properties, or concept cells that fire to a specific concept? So we look to nature for inspiration, and one thing that you might have heard of is the flocking mechanism in birds are based on quite simple learning rules, so local learning rules. And so in this case, this void simulation, you can see that they basically, each of these voids follow the average direction of their neighbors, and you can see this local coordinated activity kind of emerge just based on these local rules. So that kind of inspired by that, we thought about how we would alter our learning rules. So we still have the simple coordinate learning rule. This kind of clusters the stimuli or the concept towards the relevant stimuli. So in this case, this is just an example where the stimulus is here and the K winners move towards the stimulus. But what we add here is this kind of what we call a recurrent update, where the K winners move towards the center of themselves. So this is independent of the stimulus, but they're kind of trying to figure out where they are with respect to the other winners. And this very simple local rule is basically how they kind of develop this much sharper tuning, and how they kind of what we call flock together. Just to hammer the point home, this is just an example with like apples and pears, and you can see that they kind of get more and more tuned to these particular instances. You're going to have interleaved learning with different concepts, and at the end of learning, you have these very a group of like an assembly of neurons that care about particular parts of the feature space. So in the spatial case, this might be a bit more interesting. So instead of just starting with a number of clusters, you actually start with thousands of units now, right? So, but with this learning rule, now you can see that just with this additional local recurrent rule, you can see that there are many units that kind of find a similar position together. And so there's now hundreds or maybe 1,000 units at a particular location here. Might be a bit clearer to see it here, in case that wasn't so clear. But you can see that now you can have a neural assembly here that cares about a particular location without really defining a particular cluster. So here are just some quantifications of the grid scores. So basically they look a bit like grid cells. So this shows how neural assemblies can form by very simple local rules, where the neural flocking will kind of produce these similar tuned assemblies and with concept and place cell-like representations. So before we set these clusters or place cells, but here we can see that the cell assemblies naturally form, kind of allowing it to represent whatever the task requires it to. And this scales as well. So we can have millions of neurons and show the same behavior, kind of allowing this multi-level kind of account to work. So just to show how show that point, so we have these are Shepard's category learning rules. Doesn't matter too much what these mean, but the point here would be that type 1 is the easiest one because category A is on the left and category B is on the right, and so you only have to care about the color. Type 6 is the hardest, so is when they actually kind of have to memorize each particular feature in order to do this categorization. And you can see this with human participants. So it's the easiest, you learn this, the error goes down straight away, whereas type 6 is quite hard. And we can capture these or the ordering of these learning curves with this model. And so this is kind of an illustration of what that looks like whilst learning. So, you can see these units kind of moving around a bit, but then they kind of form these virtual clusters, even though there's a few hundred of them in this case. But they care about the relevant dimension, right? So only the color dimension. So for type 6, they would just have to memorize the stimuli. So it kind of recruits a bunch of units at each corner of the stimulus space. And so why do we need so many units, right? So one obvious answer is about it's more robust to failure modes. So damage or cell death or synaptic turnover. And we can see that. So this is what I showed you with animations just now. But here we show if you have 0, 25, or 50 lesions at the particular points, it's basically like having those units stop working at the time. So with 20 units, of course, the model like goes to that chance. But with more units, you're less affected by the lesion, and at 10,000 units, you're totally fine. It's also better with the recurrent updates. So if you add some noise to the position of the units, that also helps. So you can see here with a lot of noise, the kind of the behavior gets worse, but then with a bit of recurrence, it already recovers the behavior. So don't have too much time to talk about this, but basically I've shown you that we can decompose this cognitive model into a neuronal population or neuron-like population. But we can go further if we know about some kind of functional properties of your brain area. So in this case, we knew about anterior and posterior hippocampus have different functional properties. Kind of anterior hippocampus carrying a bit more has general tuning fields, whereas posterior hippocampus is a bit more narrow. And so this kind of mapped onto some interesting previous FMRI data that these tasks that required attention to generalize across stimuli recruited the anterior hippocampus more, and ones that needed more specific memories recruited the posterior hippocampus more. And we were able to incorporate this into our model by having two pools of neurons with different tuning fields, and kind of competes to output during learning. And the most appropriate ones would kind of like contribute more to output, so compare and kind of become more dominant. And you can see here that with the anterior hippocampus, it really learns the like type 1, where you would attend to a particular feature and then generalize across stimuli much faster, whereas posterior, this hippocampus cares more about type 6. So in summary, we decompose the cognitive models constructs, these clusters, into a lower level mechanism, neural population. And so inspired by flocking, we suggested the hippocampus could do a similar thing with recurrence, which naturally leads to virtual clusters and concept cell and place cells assemblies. Finally, we link across these levels from behavior neurons to give a more complete explanatory account with a model that can scale while it retains its behavior. And this is our answer to how neuroassemblies that encode abstract representation might form, like concept location representations. So of course, I wanted to add a note on neural networks, or especially spiking neural networks, which I know a lot less about compared to you folks. So I'd be very interested to know what you think about this. So I do think that it really fits into the multi-level mechanistic decomposition framework. That is, if you have some behavior, you kind of want the network to be able to, of course, capture behavior, but it might also want to do it in a particular way, right? So cognitive models have these abstract cognitive components, like, you might have some memory or some specific thing that you think that humans do, that's able to be captured by the spiking neural network. So of course, this might be a difficult problem. So it's hard to constrain any neural networks really, or even especially spiking neural networks, to learn like humans or with these components. So one idea could be to kind of split these networks up with some kind of modularity, where you have different brain modules or cognitive modules, like I kind of mentioned in the previous few slides, with different functions or properties might be able to constrain this. So we do have one project that led by a PhD student in Brad's group, Xiaoliang Luo, and he combined a deep convolutional neural net with a clustering model at the top to kind of like coordinate, and they were able to coordinate its behavior to work together to constrain their activity. So that's kind of coming soon as well. Well, so that's all. Thank you for your attention, and this is some of the papers that's relevant. And I also have this new blog that I've been blogging a bit more on if you're interested in basic science stuff. So thank you very much. Happy to answer your questions.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for the talk, Rob. It was really clear. And yeah, thanks for trying to also starting to make the link to spiking neural networks at the end as well. Yeah, so I guess I'll just ask a quick question and then open the floor to everyone else. So actually, yeah, I was a bit confused about the I guess what constitutes a neuron in your setup. So maybe you could just expand on that a bit. I was going to ask you what the neuron model is, but then at the end where you talked about the changing to deep neural networks, I suddenly realized maybe I was a bit confused. So
yeah, so it is still much higher up on the, I guess, the level of abstraction than the actual neuron that I guess you're thinking about. So it will still be something, it activates with respect to I guess it's not so far from a artificial neural network. Like it activates in according to the input stimulus, right? So if it's similar to the stimulus in the sense that, you know, like on this, you know, it's these three-dimensional plots. If it has wings and it flies, then I can have these units that care about those features. They're kind of like they live in a multi-dimensional feature space. And they activate in accordance to that. So in this case, it's like exponential functions, but obviously they can be Gaussians as well. So that's the kind of idea.
All right, cool. I think that makes sense. So thanks. I think Rory had a question.
Hi. Yeah, I was going to ask something a little bit similar to Marcus, so I guess I'll try to change it up a little bit. So is it effectively a graph neural network then? Because it looks like it's doing message passing in the second step, the recurrent step. And then I was also going to ask the connections, assuming there are like weights and connections between the units, do they tend to follow something like Dale's law, where a given unit will only have excitatory or inhibitory effect on all of its neighbors, as opposed to a mix?
So your first question, I think no. So it might be a bit simpler than you think. So it the second step is really about tuning. So you have many units that kind of have, like I showed simple examples where they're very close to each other, but they might actually be more the tuning might be a lot more diffuse, if that's the right word. But yeah, basically they're kind of trying to pull these neurons together in order to show similar selectivities. So I don't think that's the same thing as the graph neural network. For your second question, so we don't constrain anything. So there's a few versions of this where we do have like inhibition, like with the standard cognition model, you have like if one cluster is activated, the others are kind of like inhibited. But there is no constraint as to how strong or that has to be. I think we have a free parameter for that. In the model I've shown here, actually, there's not even an inhibitory component. It's inhibitory only in the sense that there's a k-winners and the others don't activate. So there exists as a parameter in our model, but it's kind of not necessary at the moment to fit our data, but it's definitely can be part of it. Yeah.
Cool. I think there's a question from Galina. Oh, okay. I'm happy if you, if you'd like to, okay, I can read it out, unless you want to read it yourself, ask it yourself. Okay, I can read it. So Galina says, thank you for the talk. Is there any evidence that representations do drift to each other according to the concept similarity?
They drift to each other as in, so I guess this is about how I guess the model is kind of pulling things together. Is that I guess that's my interpretation of the question. I suppose there's two.
Sorry, she means, oh, he or she means the neural evidence.
Yeah, so I think I guess there's two ways of answering that. One is yes and one is no. And so the answer is that these kind of cell assemblies exist, right? So you don't have like a random, it's not like if you just randomly subset of place cells, you have every single possible location, but rather they're kind of everything is a bit more clustered together in a particular way. So if you do PCA on place cell population, you actually have groups of cells that kind of like have much more stronger tuning to a particular way. So one answer is that we are actually trying to build a model that explains that kind of phenomenon. And also in concept cells, you actually it's very sparse. You don't actually have tuning for everything that's in between, I don't know, like Jennifer Aniston and the other actresses that they put, but they're much more specifically tuned. So yes, but then there's no evidence of this particular mechanism working this way. And actually that's, I guess, would be the next step. I think we have some talks with some collaborators to talk a bit more about this. And I think, to actually test this question. And I think it's actually one of the things that's hard about it is, especially even in place cells, which is kind of the easiest setup because you know where the rats are, is that it's hard to track many cells over a long period of time especially during a learning task. So now, of course, we all know people are starting to do a lot of high density recording, which I think is getting more and more possible to do this. So that's quite exciting as well. So it'd be nice to see what's going on when rats or people are learning.
Okay, I just misunderstood. You were talking about cells that were clustered together because I was thinking that it's the representations because they also drift apart and but you're more.
I see. You're talking about neural drift as well.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah, so I haven't followed the really interesting stuff that has been coming up these days, but I think the initial idea of drift was kind of they were going away, like they kind of don't look like what they do before anymore. But I think there's like some new work that I briefly saw about how drift happens less with well-learned places. So I think the early work, at least this was the claim, was that when the drift happens when we're forgetting or it's not as well a learned environment in place cells at least. I think it kind of, at least in our model, it does relate to that in the sense that once it's well learned, you shouldn't have much drift. And early on, you will have much more. But I think that like area of research is so fast moving at the moment that I can't really, wouldn't really interpret much more than that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think there's a question from Rory again.
That's good.
Hey, yeah, so I'm just thinking about how you'd map this then onto like a neural network scenario. And am I right in thinking that you would maybe need to have some sort of task for the network to learn then, as opposed to just learning representations of an input data set? And do you have any thoughts on what kind of task might be suitable for that transition?
Well, yeah, actually, so all of the things I've been talking about always have a task. So although the learning rule is local, so it doesn't really necessarily need the task. But I guess I am a fan of having a task that's kind of like teases because the internal representations will be, I guess, task relevant. It'll care more about what's important, the features. So I didn't talk too much about the attention tuning, but you can also kind of like tune these widths of the neuron sensitivities depending on how important it is to the task. So wait, talking about. So your question was more about whether you need or what kind of task is helpful for?
I guess, yeah, kind of an ecological task that you might train such a network to do, I guess, like spatial navigation or something.
Yeah, so yes, I suppose one obvious, because in a sense you can do unsupervised learning here as well. Like in the rodent task, you're just kind of like moving around, kind of figuring something out. So I think Brad actually had a really, well, I would say maybe a bit too ambitious idea about trying to basically connect this to a convolutional net where you would see what kind of representation come out just through navigating. I think the details need to be ironed out there, but the idea is that like in the first half of the first paper I was talking about, the question is not necessarily what the components of the model are, but what kind of representation it learns through the task. So if you were able to reconstruct, for example, a map of a maze just through the model, I think that would be quite a nice demonstration of its learning the relevant representations, and then maybe you can see something similar in the brain as well. Yeah.
Just on that note, you got me thinking of this toolbox, which someone released quite recently, which I'll put in the chat, which is called Rat in a Box. But it's a toolbox for, basically it generates movement trajectories in 2D, and then also generates like synthetic neuron data. So for example, with this trajectory, what would the activity of place cells be, grid cells, boundary cells? And then you can use that to train neural network models too. I don't know. If you wanted to try and implement Brad's idea, this could be somewhere to start.
Yeah, no, I'll check that out. Cool. Yeah, I'll save that.
Cool.
A graph neural network is like a generalization of a convolutional neural network, I guess. Is Brad or you interested in taking it that direction as well?
Sorry, a what?
Like a graph neural network is kind of a generalization of a convolutional neural network. I'm just wondering, had you thought about that, and maybe is Brad or yourself interested in going down that direction? Because maybe I don't understand the model fully, but it seems like there's kind of a message passing, averaging of neighbors activity mechanism in the model as it stands. And that's very much the core of how graph neural networks work as well, which is again a generalization of a convolutional neural network, where in a CNN you have this kind of rigid spatial structure of pixels being above and below each other. Sorry, I think I might be lagging a lot. And you're basically averaging this, this filter over a grid, whereas in a graph, you're averaging all of the neighbors, which can have, any kind of attributes attached to them. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, maybe does that make sense? And are you thinking?
Oh, it does. I mean, I know a bit about graph neural networks, but I just haven't really thought about it like that actually. So I need to think a bit more about how it maps on, but it does sound like it might be relevant. I guess the way I thought about graph neural was more like binary, not binary, but like how, because people talk about graphs in that way, that and we're always talking about this kind of continuous structure, but it doesn't matter because we have these nodes. So yeah, maybe I need to think a bit more about this before I can say anything interesting, I think. Yeah, but okay. Think about it. But...
Yeah, I think it seems worth looking into, in my opinion, because to my untrained eye, it seems like the message passing in your model maps nicely onto a graph and analogously onto a convolutional neural network.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, thanks for that.